Picture this. The year is 1960. The charts are ruled by velvet voices, horn sections, and grooves that could heal heartbreak. Every year, one R&B artist rises to the top, crowned by radio, jukeboxes, and dance floors across America. But when the decade ended, who stayed legendary? And who disappeared into the static of soul history? 1960, Brook Benton, Kiddy-O.
You off my mind, and you can make me feel.
Brook Benton's voice was pure silk, smooth, warm, and tailor-made for late-night radio. In 1960, his single Kiddy-O rose to number 1 on the R&B charts because it struck the perfect balance between pop elegance and southern soul grit.
I called you on the phone, but you stopped.
The track captured the optimism of early 60s rhythm and blues, when strings and swing coexisted with deep emotional storytelling. Benton's delivery felt effortless, confident, but tender. The sound of a man who understood every shade of love. Before his solo breakthrough, Benton was already respected behind the scenes, writing for artists like Clyde McPhatter and Nat King Cole.
Please give me that love you got.
That songwriter's discipline shaped his phrasing. Every word in Kiddy-O landed like a quiet conversation. Through the early 60s, he stacked more hits: the Boll Weevil song, Hotel Happiness, each one proof that soul didn't always need to shout. But as the decade toughened under voices like James Brown and Otis Redding, Benton's polished croon slipped out of fashion. Then came his 1970 comeback, Rainy Night in Georgia.
I've wondered.
A timeless masterpiece that reintroduced his velvet tone to a new generation. He passed in 1988 at 56, leaving behind one of R&B's most graceful legacies, music that still feels like warm light in a cold room. 1961, Bobby Lewis, Tossin' and Turnin'. Bobby Lewis had a voice that sounded like it had lived through every line he sang, gritty, restless, and alive. In 1961, his breakout hit, Tossin' and Turnin', captured that same sleepless energy the title promised. The song shot to number 1 because it was everything early 60s R&B needed. A mix of jump blues rhythm, rock and roll swagger, and pure dance floor fun. With its thumping backbeat, honking saxophone, and Lewis's raspy delivery, it became one of the first R&B tracks to dominate both black and white airwaves.
Turned off the light, I jumped back into bed, it was
Sitting atop the Hot 100 for 7 straight weeks. Born in Indianapolis and raised in orphanages, Lewis learned to sing loud enough for anyone to hear him. He hustled through club gigs in Harlem and Chicago before Tossin' and Turnin' made him a national name. Though follow-up singles like One Track Mind cracked the charts, the wave eventually passed. But that one record became eternal.
but you know it's you, and only you.
The song's revival in Animal House and countless commercials re-cemented it as the sound of early rock innocence. Lewis kept touring well into his 80s, always performing with the same grin that made the song immortal. He passed away in 2020 at 95, remembered as the man who made insomnia swing. (1962), King Curtis, Soul Twist. King Curtis wasn't just a sax player. He was the engine behind an entire era of soul. In 1962, his instrumental hit, Soul Twist, climbed to number 1 on the R&B charts, proving that a single horn could command as much presence as any singer. Its groove was tight, punchy, and irresistibly danceable, the sound of R&B stepping boldly into the modern age. Before that success, Curtis was already a behind-the-scenes legend, his sax blazing through records by the Coasters, Buddy Holly, and even Chuck Willis. He had the rare ability to make his horn talk, cry, or shout, every note bursting with emotion. After Soul Twist, Curtis became a key architect of the Atlantic Records sound, leading the Kingpins and backing Aretha Franklin on monumental hits like Respect, Chain of Fools, and Think. He also produced and arranged for countless others, fusing gospel fire with pop precision. Tragically, in 1971, at just 37, Curtis was stabbed to death outside his New York apartment, a loss that stunned the industry. Yet his sound never died. It echoes through funk, soul, and hip-hop samples to this day. Reminding listeners that sometimes one saxophone really can speak for a generation. But between 1962 and 1963, something shifted. R&B's smooth edges started to crack, and the sound that once whispered began to roar. 1963, Little Johnny Taylor, Part-Time Love. Little Johnny Taylor's Part-Time Love hit #1 on the R&B charts in 1963 because it nailed the pain of being loved halfway, too honest to ignore and too soulful to forget. It blended the confessional storytelling of the blues with the emotional clarity of early Southern soul, landing right in the sweet spot of what listeners craved.
The next time my baby leaves.
Taylor's voice was pure heartache, rough edges wrapped around smooth phrasing, giving every line the weight of lived experience. Born in Arkansas and raised in California, he came up through the gospel circuit before shifting to secular R&B, and that spiritual fire stayed in his tone.
I'd rather be dead.
Part-Time Love sold over 1 million copies and inspired countless covers, including versions by Ann Peebles and Isaac Hayes, solidifying its place as a deep soul standard. While Taylor never repeated that commercial peak, he toured for decades across the Southern club scene, maintaining a loyal audience long after radio moved on. His later recordings kept that same raw honesty, proof that he was never chasing trends. He passed away in 2002 at 58, remembered as one of the last torchbearers of old-school soul storytelling. 1964, no official Billboard R&B #1. In 1964, Billboard controversially suspended the R&B singles chart, arguing that rhythm and blues had merged into mainstream pop. That decision said a lot about how dominant black music had become. The sound of Motown, Stax, and girl groups was the mainstream. 1965, 4 tops. I Can't Help Myself, Sugar Pie, Honey Bunch. By 1965, Billboard's R&B chart had officially returned after a short hiatus, just in time to capture Motown's explosion. The list had been paused because R&B and pop hits were overlapping, but as soul splintered into distinct regional sounds, Motown in Detroit, Stax in Memphis, Billboard realized the genre needed its own space again. The 4 tops embodied that revival perfectly. Tight harmonies, thunderous rhythm, and Levi Stubbs' powerhouse lead. I Can't Help Myself, Sugar Pie Honey Bunch hit #1 because it was pure joy, romantic desperation coded in melody. They followed with classics like Reach Out, I'll Be There, and Standing in the Shadows of Love, sealing their legend. Even as styles changed, they toured for decades, keeping their harmonies alive. Stubbs passed in 2008, but every Motown hook still carries their echo. If you're loving these deep dive stories, hit like and subscribe. It keeps the music history alive and helps this channel keep digging through the forgotten grooves. And by 1966, the sound of soul was changing again. 1966, Sam and Dave, Hold On, I'm Coming. By 1966, Sam and Dave were the voice of pure Southern soul, no polish, just fire. Hold On, I'm Coming hit #1 because it exploded with gospel intensity and grit. written by Isaac Hayes and David Porter, it became a rallying cry for resilience and love in turbulent times. Backed by Booker T and the MGs and the Memphis Horns, their sound was unstoppable. The duo followed with Soul Man, a track that reshaped the language of rhythm and blues itself. After splitting in the early 70s, they each toured separately, but never recaptured that lightning they once held together. Sam Moore carried the legacy until Dave Prater's death in a 1988 car crash. Their energy still defines what soul duet means: sweaty, joyous, unstoppable. 1967, Aretha Franklin, Respect. When Aretha Franklin reworked Otis Redding's Respect, she didn't just earn a hit, she changed the world's tempo. Released in 1967, it topped Hop charts, turning personal pride into a social anthem. That blend of gospel roots and political timing made her the decade's defining voice. The song's demand, R-E-S-P-E-C-T, became shorthand for empowerment. Aretha went on to dominate the next 2 decades with 18 Grammys, presidential awards, and a voice that defined soul itself. Even into her later years, she could bring any room to its knees with one note. Aretha passed away in 2018, leaving behind not just a legacy, but a blueprint for how power should sound. 1968, James Brown, Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud.
Until we get what we deserve. We've been built.
1968 was James Brown's revolution year. Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud wasn't just a #1 hit. It was a declaration.
Brother, we can't quit until we get our share.
America was on edge, and Brown's voice cut through the chaos with unshakable pride. He was already the godfather of soul, but this track crowned him the spokesman of Black confidence. Brown's relentless work ethic, thousands of shows, endless hits, tight as steel bands, made him an empire unto himself.
You're killing me. All right.
His grooves built the DNA of funk and later hip-hop. Despite personal controversies and legal trouble, his musical innovation never dulled. When he died in 2006, crowds flooded the streets for his final procession. Few artists ever held that kind of grip on rhythm, culture, and identity all at once. And then came the final year of the 60s, when R&B stood at the crossroads between Motown polish and the raw funk of a new decade. 1969, Junior, Walker, and the All-Stars. What does it take to win your love?
To win your love from me.
By the end of the decade, soul music had matured, smoother, deeper, and emotionally precise. And Junior Walker and the All-Stars delivered the perfect send-off. Their 1969 hit, What Does It Take to Win Your Love, soared to #1 on the R&B chart.
Make me see what does it take to win your love.
Blending Motown polish with Walker's raw, pleading saxophone. It was slower, more reflective than earlier hits like Shotgun, marking a shift toward the lush soul that would define the 1970s. The song's sax intro alone became iconic, aching, yet romantic. Junior Walker stayed with Motown well into the 70s, touring constantly and influencing generations of horn players from Clarence Clemens to Maceo Parker. He passed away in 1995 at 64, but his tone still breathes through every soulful sax solo that followed. And that wraps up the story of every R&B chart topper from the 1960s, the decade that built the foundation for everything soul and funk would become. Hit like, tap subscribe, and let's keep this soul revival alive. If you enjoyed traveling through these voices, keep the groove going with our next video, a deep dive into those underrated rhythm and blues trailblazers you might have missed. You'll find it on screen now.